Hello and welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday.
Hi, everybody.
Yay. Welcome to Mystical Awakenings right here on KGRA with Deb and Arjay. So we are getting really excited. We're 1 week away. A week from now, right now, we will be at the Lakeside Resort and Conference Center getting prepared to start the conference,
Absolutely.
the Michigan UFO Contact, Friday morning. And we couldn't be happier. We're excited to see everybody. So if you don't have your tickets, you know where to get them. miufocon.com. So we're in for quite a night.
Yes.
I feel like these people are totally amazing, and I met them for like 2 seconds backstage, and they feel very familiar to us.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I don't know about you, but I'm excited to have
So
them
we're going to
on
do
here
a
with
little bio
you.
here, and let's see what's going on here. Join us tonight for an enlightening conversation about the work that Jaci and Bill Kousoulas do. They will also talk about the upcoming Mothman Festival. We're going to talk Mothman tonight.
Same weekend.
Phenomenology. Excuse me, I knew I was going to mess this up. Phenomenology Research Professionals. I knew I was going to mess that up. Jaci and Bill Kousoulas are Phenomenology Research Professionals, PRP. We are the authors of the Bridging the Tragedy, psychological study based upon the 1967 Silver Bridge disaster in Point Pleasant. And I want to get into tonight about that area too. We're going to talk about that in West Virginia. And the post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon that often occurs after tragedy. We are qualitative researchers who seek to understand the connections between psychology, spirituality, and the paranormal by applying the scientific method. Bill's interest in the paranormal began in the late 70s with the original Project UFO television series. In 2003, he was introduced to the Mothman Prophecies movie, and it changed his life. Jaci is a retired USPS postmaster and a current business operator. She specializes in research, data, and analytics, and connecting the dots between intuition, perception, and reality. She is a first-hand paranormal experiencer, including UFOs, disembodied voices, apparitions, and psychic phenomena. We'll go along just fine.
Yes, we have a lot in common.
On March 1st, 2024, we embarked upon our next study, which investigates relationships between trauma and paranormal experiences, like bridging the tragedy. And, we're going to get into this tonight about, it does traumatize people when they have experiences when it comes to the paranormal. Absolutely. And so you scroll down a little bit here. Okay. So we intend to focus on the positive outcomes that our participants have gained by experiencing these phenomena. If you are interested in participating in the study, we welcome you to contact us. We live in Sycamore, Illinois, 60 miles northwest of Chicago, but closer to cornfields than skyscrapers. Okay, let's please welcome our guests tonight, Jaci and Bill.
Yay.
Hi.
Welcome,
Hi.
Jaci.
Hey, good evening, guys.
Good
My
evening.
tongue's not working tonight. I just couldn't say that. I knew I was going to mess that word up.
Yeah, and if you already have that in your mind, it's going to happen, right?
Well, when you've got a last name to contend with like ours, plus a word like phenomenology, which is even longer than our last name is, we're kind of setting you up,
Right, that's true.
Well, I'll mark that down as a yes, okay?
So we do have a little more in common because we have a last name like DeRoos. And it doesn't sound terrible, but when you see it spelled, people mutilate it.
Yeah, they always ask us how to spell it, yeah, for sure.
And ufology, those in the field say that fine. Other people look at that and UFO, what? So we get it. But we were really drawn to you. We were actually given your information by Margetti, and we talked a bit. We ended up talking quite a bit about the work that you two do. And I said, oh my gosh, we, as two couples here, we have a lot in common. And, we were very intrigued by what we heard. So we wanted to bring you on so you could tell all of our listeners what it is you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Deb, RJ, thank you
Mhm.
for having us on tonight. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Good.
So, really, I mean, I've been paranormal interested for most of my life. The first book that was ever read to me by my mom when I was a little kid was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And it's been really, I kind of picked up and took off from that point forward. And I mean, we're talking a lot of years ago now, but when I saw the Mothman Prophecies movie, I mean, it really did impact me. And what really got me was the fact that the movie was based upon a book which was based upon experiences that happened during the year that I was born. And so those things just kind of coalesced for me, and I began investigating things. And Jackie and I just really got into the whole topic of Mothman, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We traveled to Point Pleasant in 2016, and I was in my doctoral program at the time. I went back to school later in life, and we didn't know what we were going to do with my research abilities, the skills that I'd learned in graduate school. We had no idea where we were going with this, but I studied the phenomenon of post-traumatic growth. And for anybody who's not familiar with that term, what it really is just the things that we don't expect when we go through traumatic events, that really we learn new ways of living, new ways of being, new ways, not just of coping with what happened to us, but we learn new ways to thrive. I mean, thrive in life. And without getting too far off or up onto a soapbox, that's what it is in a nutshell. So, our fascination with paranormal activity and with really Point Pleasant, even more so than Mothman, but the community of Point Pleasant led us to the first project, which was Bridging the Tragedy.
Sure. So you obviously talked to a lot of people that probably went through that or were there when it happened, right?
We did. We did. So we actually we got to be friends with people in Point Pleasant because we started in 16 and we just went back every year after that. Initially, it was going to be just a vacation, but we met a lady by the name of Carolyn Harris, who was really integral in the community and getting the whole Mothman Festival kicked off. But she was an older lady. It's kind of a long story, but she kind of really welcomed us into her restaurant, and she felt like one of those long lost relative type people. And we just sat down with her. We got to know her, and she looked familiar to me. And I said, "Did I see you in a documentary or two?" She said, "Well, I've been in, I think 17 is what she said."
Wow.
And she was very humble. She seemed embarrassed by that. But what we learned shortly after that was she had lost her young son in the bridge disaster along with her first husband. So it was very, very personal to her. And that just really made us fall in love with Carolyn. And we spent every day on that trip. We'd go to her restaurant, we'd have lunch, we'd have a Coke, we'd visit with her. We just loved her. And a few months later, after we were back into our regular lifestyles again, I told Jackie on Christmas Eve, I really want to get a hold of Carolyn to see if I can write a story about her. And Jackie said, "That's good, but let's wait till after the holidays. This is Christmas Eve." And I agreed that would make sense. The next day, one of our friends from West Virginia who we met with Carolyn sent us a message, said Carolyn has had a heart attack. And the very next day, the day after Christmas, Carolyn passed away.
Aw.
So we were crushed. I mean, we were just crushed. And the good thing that came out of that for us is we had become friends with Jeff Wamsley also. We weren't really friends at this point, but we got to know him. So I reached out to him, and when I had a residency in Arlington the following summer, I asked him if he'd like to get together for dinner with us, and he accepted. And from that point forward, we just continued to build relationships in Point Pleasant, became friends with all kinds of folks. And when I finally finished school in 21, we put together a research plan to focus on the bridge disaster and post-traumatic growth that might have occurred within the community of Point Pleasant and the greater Ohio River Valley. And with the help of some folks locally, including the publisher of the newspaper in town, they published an ad for us. They didn't charge us a dime for it. Long story short, we ended up with 11 people who we interviewed, and we've got their stories. And then we performed a data analysis on the whole thing and came up with a book. And we were able to find out all the good things that happened in the community, which I think is different than most paranormal studies and books, because I think the shock factor is the big seller when it comes to the paranormal. I know that's what got me interested in the first place. But when you focus on the good things that happen in a community and to people who have been through things like this, it's just a different story. And it's very heartwarming. We were just really, really fortunate to have these people share their experiences with us and allow us to do this book on their lives.
So the bridge has been rebuilt, right? Yes.
It
I mean,
has.
I can imagine just when it was completed, how hard it must have been just for people just to want to go across that bridge, just to want to, after what had happened.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say at least half of the people, wouldn't you say? Half the people we interviewed talked about having fear of bridges, and just you've always got, your stomach can tie up in a knot when you're maybe stuck on the bridge. I mean, they still feel that.
I would assume so. I mean, PTSD would have to run really deep with that. And like you guys, say in your bio, that's really across all paranormal, but something as big as that's a tragedy that never goes away and has to be terrible for people to deal with. So I'm interested, have you two always done paranormal work together? How is this, how did it grow? Where did it start? How did it grow?
Go ahead, honey.
I don't even know where it started. I have no idea where our interest even started. If we talked about that, like first, during our first part of our relationship, or if it's something that came about later on in life. I think it was later on when we actually started talking about paranormal stuff. And I think our biggest thing, well, the Mothman, of course, the Mothman Prophecy movie and the book, but then with my experiences throughout my life, MUFON was what we decided that we should do together, because when he was in school, we didn't have a lot of time together. So we tried to find things that we in so that we could kind of have like a date, and that go to a MUFON meeting. So that was our very first thing I think that we did together, was the MUFON meeting.
Well, I think we went to Point Pleasant first.
Oh, okay.
The first couple times, and then we got into MUFON. But please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I really don't know before. I mean, because reading books and having conversations and we watched a lot of stuff on TV, of course, Ancient Aliens and the History Channel and that kind of stuff. And we had a lot of talk about a lot of different things and what our thoughts might be about that. But I think, MUFON, the MUFON meeting was the first thing after going to Point Pleasant. But I mean, when we went to Point Pleasant the very first time, I told Bill that I was down for it, but we needed to visit Serpent Mound too, because I have all these other interests that I didn't know that for sure if he would be so interested in. And actually, when we went to Serpent Mound, he didn't seem thrilled, and I couldn't understand how he was thrilled to be there. But so our work together, literally, our first book is our first actual work. So.
Right. So you might understand that before the Mothman showed up, there were a lot of UFO sightings that were going on in that area before that happened.
There were, as a matter of fact, I mean, they call it one of the biggest UFO flaps of all time, around 65, 66. But what people who are familiar with Mothman, but not maybe to the degree that we've invested our energy in learning about it, are aware of, is that there were between 100 and 200 reported sightings of this black, winged creature with the piercing red eyes that chased cars and scared people half to death. Never hurt anybody, but just scared them. But what's not talked about as much is that there were even more UFO sightings than there were sightings of Mothman during that time frame as well, too. There were lights in the sky. There were men in black that were trying to shut down people talking about these things going on. There were cattle mutilations. There were disembodied voices. I mean, really, it's very similar to how Skinwalker Ranch is described today. Though all those things were going on in Point Pleasant during Mothman.
Well, it's interesting because Point Pleasant, it's on a river, correct? And across the river north is Ohio. Is that correct? Okay, so that whole area, the Serpent, you brought up Serpent Mountain. Deb and I went to Serpent Mountain in 2017 for the solar eclipse. It was amazing.
I loved the energy there. I just loved it.
And we were running this place out in the middle of nowhere, and we had a Bigfoot sighting there also, which was pretty amazing. But that whole area, if you go back into history, it was definitely a metropolis for Native American tribes, and way back when. And the whole point that a meteorite hit there in front of that Serpent Mound. There's a big crater there. And I just think there's something special about that area that attracts people going way back. I was trying to look up ley lines today in the area, and other things like anomalies, that magnetic anomalies and all that there. I just couldn't find the right thing. But what is your take on that? Do you feel there's that whole area, like within a 200-300 mile radius, there's something about that area?
Well, the subtitle to our book is Silver Linings in the Mysterious Ohio River Valley. And from what we've seen, we really believe the whole area is magical.
Right.
It's definitely very mystical. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the Native American influence. John Keel in the Mothman Prophecies book talked about how tribes settled every state within what was to become the United States, except for West Virginia. They only used it for hunting. They didn't try to have homesteads there for whatever reason. And then Keel also talked about moon-eyed people who lived underground, so to speak, who only come out at night. They had large eyes. They were very sensitive to light. So there was that phenomena going on too. I know that natives do have, in part of their tradition, the belief that where rivers come together, there's a certain spiritual energy that you don't find everywhere else. So you've got the Kanawha and Ohio River that come together right at Point Pleasant. That's why it's called Point Pleasant. George Washington actually surveyed that area, and as legend has it, when he was looking out over the rivers, he said, "This is a pleasant point." And then they ended up just reversing the words, called the town Point Pleasant. So I think there's a native influence there. There's the old growth mountains that are there, some of the oldest mountains in the world. There's just a lot of really fascinating stuff, and perhaps ley lines, as you mentioned as well, may contribute to some of the things that happen there as well. But it's a very special place.
I'm so glad you brought up the Moon-eyed people, because I was checking that out 6 months ago. We were looking into it, but here in Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula, supposedly two guys that were working on this farm dug up these statues that look just like those carved moon-eyed people they have in the museum down there. And I know they got kicked out of that area. So the legend goes, right? And I'm just wondering. I'll send this information to you, and I'll tell you what, they look identical. So I just wondered if they wandered up this way, And but it was fascinating that just came to me, the information that these two statues they dug up in the Upper Peninsula and the ones that were down there in West Virginia or wherever it was looked identical.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because we're good friends with the Illinois State MUFON director, a guy by the name of Sam Moranto. And Sam's been on episodes of the UFO Hunters TV show that was out on History Channel a few years ago.
Yeah.
And he had originally, when we first got connected, he had been the MUFON lead investigator into what's known as the Chicagoland Mothman sightings that were reported between 11 and still currently. And he had a hypothesis that there was a connection between perhaps the Chicagoland area, Point Pleasant, and then he mentioned Mackinac Island. So when you talk about there being some type of moon-eyed presence recovered there in the UP, that just kind of goes in line with what his theory was about that.
It was a connection with the Native Americans is what all of that was, because we were looking at connections between the Chicago Mothman reports and the flap, or whatever they want to call that, and the Point Pleasant Mothman flap. And Peter, what's his last name? I don't. He goes by Chief Cornstalk. Peter Cornstalk, Chief Cornstalk, and he was able to trace Chief Cornstalk across to the west and all the way up into Mackinac. That's where that came from.
Oh, wow.
The lineage of him. Yes, his lineage. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, they had a big flap there at the Chicago airport where several witnesses saw this UFO come down over Hangar 17, whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Sam, he investigated that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know if I know the Mothman. I think was seen there at the airport, near the airport there. If I'm correct.
Well, there were reports of the Mothman being seen there.
Yeah.
But we did do some investigating, and one of the reports that was seen at, well, there's big companies that are on there, right there at the airport, and one of them is the United States Postal Service.
Right.
And I'm a retired postmaster, and I was working at that time, so I investigated that report specifically because I had inside information. And what I found out was that a lot of the things that were reported did not mesh with, like the employee that reported it didn't mesh with her or him having a spouse that worked there as well. There was like no indication. The only thing that I could find on that would have been a truck driver, and you wouldn't wait around for a truck driver. And I mean, the whole thing didn't add up. And then contacting the plant itself and speaking with supervisors that work there, and talking to employees. I had my subordinate supervisor contact some of her friends that were there and talk to some of those people. There was no security reports done at all. There was no security updates done at all. No security talks done at all. No employees were frightened or heard anything about this Mothman. So it's like, and seriously, being a postmaster, if somebody comes in at night, I was a postmaster in West Chicago, and someone was afraid to leave at night because of a situation. And from that day forward, someone needed to stay and close the post office with that employee because it was considered a dangerous situation. And right. I mean, then it's district-wide service talks on it, So that specific report didn't add up. So I hate to, be the bearer of bad news. But
besides those two places, is there any other place that Mothman has showed up? Do you guys know about? I mean, I don't, but if you know.
There have been different reports really from all over the country and all over the world, from time to time, not with the concentration of what happened in Point Pleasant and then the frequency of reports that took place in the Northern Illinois area as well. Also, we're more than a little skeptical about that aspect of things. However, what's really interesting is in working with Sam, and then Jackie has done some significant investigating about the Illinois stuff too. What we have found are some really strange undercurrents, for lack of a better way of putting it. There are a lot of reverse number correlations. 31s are very prominent in Chicagoland. 13s are very prominent in Point Pleasant. And she knows this part of the whole conversation way better than I do. Right. But we do think there's something strange going on. We just don't really call it Mothman.
Right. And what do you think the odds are that Mothman is some sort of an extraterrestrial?
I think it's absolutely more likely than it being a cryptid. I don't think that it's a cryptid, and I'll share with you why that is. So one of the people who participated in Bridging the Tragedy is Denny Bellamy. And Denny is one who's been in, I think, over 60 documentaries about Point Pleasant and Mothman. He is the executive director of the Mason County Visitors Bureau and Convention Center. Mm-hmm. And his whole thing was, if Mothman was a flesh and blood being, we are a hunting state. Everybody in this state has guns. Everybody is very skilled. We're very safe. We know what we're doing. We would have killed it by now. There's no way that it's a flesh and blood being. The idea that it's an extraterrestrial, or as John Keel referred to it, an ultra-terrestrial, which means it's not of this particular, it's part of this Earth biosystem or whatever you want to call it. That's what he thought. And we're inclined to kind of follow his idea that we really think that Mothman is probably a transmogrification of energy, meaning it would appear to the four of us differently. It would appear to us along the lines of our own belief systems and the way we perceive information and then process it. So I do think that it's something that's beyond our comprehension, but that's as close as I can kind of come to it. I like his theory. It makes sense to me.
It makes sense to me too, because when you talk about or talk about transmogrification, and we're into Mothman, and maybe you're more into Bigfoot, and you see a Bigfoot, and we see a Mothman, that could be the same thing. John Keel wrote in one of his books that someone saw another Bigfoot grabbing the hand of another Bigfoot, pulling them up out of the earth.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, we literally could stand side by side and maybe see totally two different things.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to tell you that, I've always wondered what the link is, if there is a link. I believe there is, between the dog man, that we have also a lot of dog man sightings in Michigan, and Mothman. You get kind of the similar. The dog man does not have wings, but they have the red eyes. They have the terrifying look. So, I think it's all connected. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're talking about, the three different areas. And I don't know if I'm probably the only one that is weird enough to say, oh, I see a triangle.
Yeah.
Sure.
You're not weird enough. We're right there with you. That's
I
the first
love
thing.
it.
Yeah.
I had a feeling you guys were right on our page. So, I think that's to me, it's a sacred symbol. And that would make a lot of sense that the moon people, these different phenomenons are happening similar ways in different areas of this pyramid.
So, as we raise our frequencies and we become more aware, and the earth is raising its frequencies, and we're able to tune into different frequencies, we see different things. There's different things that exist in those levels. Perhaps they're coming through, and we're now able to see them. And only a small part of it.
The energy is changing. The energy is changing like unbelievable. And I think that with the change in the energy, whatever you want to call it, the veil or whatever, it's thinning. So the energy is thinning, where people are able to see more and feel more. Bill's never had paranormal experiences. I've had them all my life. He's starting to have paranormal experiences. And I don't know that it's because he hangs out with me, or is he just more open now? I don't know.
Or all of the above.
Yeah.
And I think that you're absolutely right on that, Jackie. We are, things are changing, we're evolving. Everything is, it's vibration and frequency, and we are able to see through that veil more than we could 30 years ago.
Right.
In the paranormal field, we have a lot more phone calls now than we did back then, with people having sightings of all different things.
Yeah.
UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, everything. So.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of strange stuff out there.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. How do you know Mothman was not responsible for collapsing that bridge?
I don't know that we do know that Mothman was not responsible. I think that just given the testimonies of the people that I've read about over the years, and then the people that are co-researchers or really have been into this for much longer than we have, the thought that John Keel had, and that Andy Colvin, who is another very prolific publisher, writer, and researcher into Mothman, have talked about, that they felt that it was a thunderbird or a Garuda in the Eastern tradition, Hindu, Buddhist tradition. And the Garuda really is more of a healer, more of maybe a warner, something that wants to right wrongs. And so as we take a look at what happened with the Silver Bridge disaster, although there was never any kind of a prophecy that was given that directly spoke to the fact that the bridge was going to be going down, Keel and others were getting messages that something was going to happen. There was going to be some type of a catastrophe that happened on the Ohio River.
Right.
Keel thought it was going to be a power plant. He thought that a power plant was going to explode along the banks of the river. And in the movie with Richard Gere, at one point, the protagonist, John Klein, played by Richard Gere, goes to a chemical plant because he thinks it's going to explode because he's been getting all this input that's telling him from some divine source that something's going to happen. And this is what he put two and two together was going to happen. So I don't think that an entity that's planning to cause damage, I mean, we have terrorists on our planet that will tell you we're gonna bomb this, we're gonna bomb that. But this paranormal entity didn't harm anybody directly, was warning, it's like it was trying to come through and deliver a message along, you use the word frequency, so I'll use that as well. But maybe it couldn't quite connect with us with the exact frequency to give us the information that we needed to be able to try to prevent it. So it seemed to me like it was a warning. It was more of a harbinger, something that was a protector deity type thing trying to help people. Those are just my 2 cents worth.
Can I do my 2 cents?
Yes, please.
Which is kind of in line with what Bill was talking, but it's just like a twist that weird stuff pops in my head and then I have to run with it. And at the point in Point Pleasant at Two-Windy Way Park, there is a water panther stone. And it was found in a small town, Leroy, south of Point Pleasant. But the reason I'm bringing up the water panther stone is because the water panthers are the protectors of the underworld. They're a Plutarian type of entity, whatever it is. And and it also protects the copper because anything under the earth is being protected by the water panther. So if we have a Mothman that never hurt anybody his entire existence in Point Pleasant, and we have this water panther that rules the underworld, and you have Point Pleasant that has been filled with one tragedy after another, and Mothman and the water panther are adversaries, and they have this fight over the above land and the below land. And, this has been going on forever, according to legend. So maybe this was like a battle. This sounds crazy. Was a battle between Mothman and the water panther. And the water panther actually won because it took the bridge with the cars full of copper and pulled it down into the icy waters, where Mothman would have been trying to keep it above the water. So Mothman, I don't believe, had anything to do with the bridge collapse. If there's any kind of legend or lore or any reasoning of these deities or whatever, I would say that the water panther would be more likely to be the reason the bridge went down.
Just for the record, I don't believe it did either. I just that question came to me like, has that ever been debated on, because it was seen so much before it happened.
Yeah.
It absolutely has. It has. And I would say probably from the people that we've talked to and then just what's out there in popular culture, I'll bet it's at least an 80-20 split, that Mothman is considered dark, being the 80%. And then you have the 20% like us that see it at worst as a neutral entity, but possibly angelic.
Yeah. Carolyn thought that Mothman could possibly be an angel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And Carolyn lost her son and her first husband. So for her to say that this thing that was going on that traumatized the town the way that it did,
it has some meaning.
Perhaps angelic is a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stretch for somebody that lost family members.
Absolutely. Good point, by the way.
But it does make sense that something was there to warn people.
Yeah.
We'll probably never know exactly. Jackie, I find it very intriguing, the story that you told, because it makes perfect sense to me. But again, I'm weird. Two spiritual beings having this war, basically, where is it going to impact?
Yeah.
Right here on Earth. So, Yeah.
And then we go back to the fact that that area was very sacred. I believe a lot of people were drawn to that area. I mean, I'm going back BC,
Mm-hmm.
So for some reason, I don't know. And maybe they had contact with this being openly in the past, and other beings too. And somehow that got, the veil got back up, and we are who we are now. But back then, they may have had more conversations and contact with this type of being or other beings too.
Hmm.
It's a great point. I mean, they were way more advanced
Yeah,
in those prehistoric times spiritually,
yeah,
I think, than we are even today. We're so distracted by the material world now. I
right.
was thinking about like my own personal development and journey, and how when I was younger, I was just distracted by really the material world. And it's been, these last few years where I've kind of gone underground, so to speak, and really studied things that they're certainly not mainstream, but they're fascinating.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
And we're right there with you.
Yeah, I do it every day. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a draw. I think that many of us are here for this reason.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that leads me to ask the two of you your work together. Now, I mean, forever you're researchers, you're, you know, curious, you're going to be investigating, but the work that you do with people who have had these tragedies, can you explain what it is you do? Do you work one-on-one with people? Is it a long-standing thing? Do they have one session? What is it?
I think, we can't really call ourselves therapists. I have a doctorate in psychology, but it's not a therapeutic degree. It's a research degree.
Mm-hmm.
But we're both very empathic people. We build rapport with people quickly. So I would say that the work that we do really is the books that we write. And I think by giving people the license to be able to be their authentic selves, tell their stories without judgment, with really a goal of helping them to, first, we believe them, second, we hear them, and then we can chronicle their stories and then analyze the data across the whole candidate pool and come up with results that can bring healing to other people. I mean, whenever you share your story, if somebody else gets something from it, you heal too. And I think for us, I know for me, if I would have started off this whole journey younger in life, I would have been a therapist, because I just love helping people. But unfortunately, I didn't. So I'm going with whatever I can at this stage of my life. And I find myself, when we're interviewing people, it's my sweet spot in life. I mean, I feel very blessed to have conversations with people such as yourselves, and even more so with the people who participate in what we do, because we hear them out. Probably the centerpiece, in my opinion, of our book, Bridging the Tragedy, was when we interviewed a guy by the name of Jimmy Wedge. Jimmy Wedge was a guy who lost both his mom and his dad in the Silver Bridge disaster.
Hmm.
When he came forward and answered our ad in the Point Pleasant Register to do this, we didn't know who Jimmy was. But we went into Point Pleasant July of 2021, and we started talking to Jeff Wamsley, who runs the museum, and he's also in our book, and he's become a good friend of ours. And we talked to Rick Handley, who's in the book, and Denny Bellamy, who we already mentioned. We mentioned that we were going to be talking to Jimmy Wedge, and they all kind of looked at us sideways like, really? Jimmy Wedge? No, that you're not going to be able to interview him. He doesn't give interviews. Turns out Jimmy, he was like a state senator. He was a representative or something in the government at a really high level. He's been a successful businessman.
Right.
And he never talked about this for like 50 years. He gave one interview, I think in Columbus, Ohio. I mean, a long time ago, but he told us his story. And to be able to hear this gentleman out and to hear the trauma he went through, but what he's turned his life into as a result of that, I know he got something from it. We absolutely did. We certainly did.
Yeah, we do. At our UFO
Beautiful
conference,
story.
we've got a couple hours where people come get a chance to get up and tell their story about their sightings and or experiences, whatever. And, we had a gentleman that was 70 years old and never talked about it at all. And he was in tears, you know, that he was around, he could be in a place where he could finally talk about it. So,
Well, he and his twin brother
Yeah.
had quite an experience in a sighting when they were young, I believe early
yeah.
teens.
So all this time he held that.
They agreed as young people to never discuss this. They were both so traumatized. We're never going to talk about this again. We're not telling people, you know, this is something that we're going to push away. So, you know, we, like RJ said, we have the Michigan UFO Contact, and it's really it's an event for the experiencers to open up, to have people say, I believe you. And he, during the experiencer panel, he stood up, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the place, because for the very first time in many years, probably 50 to 60 years, he was able to get that out.
Isn't that just heartbreaking?
Yeah,
Oh,
That
absolutely.
he held that and had to live with
Mhm.
that his entire life.
Right.
That he didn't feel safe enough to share it with anybody. And that just
Right.
breaks my heart when I hear people that are afraid. I mean, I was raised with, you know, my mom basically telling us we're all crazy. You know, it's
Yeah.
like your eyes are playing tricks on you and go outside, you know, all this, you know, poo-pooing it away. But it's like, for a person to hold it until they're 70 years old before they can even start the healing.
Right.
Right.
So, like, you know, like 58, 56 years he held that, you know.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
So yeah, we totally get what you're saying and what you're doing, and that's what we, you know, what drew us to the two of you is you have that same heart, that same passion that we do.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything in the paranormal field is, you know, can touch people without causing some kind of negative in a way.
Oh, yeah.
Even, you know, a haunted house, and we did that work for years. People would contact me in tears and say, you know, I haven't told anybody because people are going to think I'm crazy, but this keeps happening in my house. And, you know, so they're living in fear. They're living in the fear of telling others. And what does that do to a person?
So
Yeah.
we broadcast out of our store here. We have a little metaphysical store. And the biggest pleasure I get is people coming in and sharing their stories, because they know they can talk here. And that's, we probably could have done a book on it ourselves, but we just didn't do it. But just the fact that, you know they can come here and talk about it, because you know, the areas, we don't get a lot of local people here. We got people from other places here. So it's just really interesting to hear their stories, and they finally can release all this emotion they had, and it's a wonderful thing.
So we absolutely love what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, people need a place to go. They need a safe place to be able to say, this is what happened, and am I losing my mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had like just weird stuff that I'm like scratching my head about it and then walking away, and it's like, okay, well, that wasn't right. You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
like, you know, just like somebody at the Congress Hotel in Chicago, and it's during the pandemic, and they're like, have the hotel shut down, and we went there, and I went into the bathroom, and it was like everything I could do to get them to even allow me to use the bathroom because they were on shutdown. And I went into the bathroom, and while I'm in there, someone else is using the bathroom, but there's nobody else in there when I come out of my stall.
Yeah.
And I'm like thinking they had to like maybe been a bathroom on the other side, like, you know, like yeah, there's two rooms, and it's like I look and there's nothing, and
Right.
and I'm like, what was that then? You know, it's like, well, it was a ghost. I mean, it had to been a ghost because the place is highly haunted, but it's like it doesn't add up in my head right away. So I haven't had like terrifying things happen, or at least I haven't felt terrified, except for one night we had 3 knocks outside Bill heard 3 knocks on a Christmas night, and I'm like, oh my God. And then he said, did you hear that? And he looked freaked out, and I said, no, I didn't hear it. And then I heard 3 knocks, and it's like, what is going on? And that scared me.
Yeah.
We have all kinds of activity in this place, and our house is next door. So yeah, we're used to it. You know, it's nothing bad, but It happens all the time, daily.
Yeah.
So
Nonstop. Friends come in and say, "Oh my God, this happened. I just saw this move," and we're like,
yeah,
Yeah.
"No big deal."
Yeah.
Happens all the time. It's good. It's good. So we have the Michigan UFO Contact coming up next weekend, and you guys have the Mothman Festival coming up next
Yay!
weekend. So how long have you been going to that? Every year? Always? Or
No, Bill doesn't like crowds. He hates crowds. And I've always wanted to go to the Mothman Festival. And he kept telling me that, going to a place where there's 5,000 people or a couple thousand, or how many were going then, because that doesn't sound like a good time. So we were asked to present at the Mothman Festival, but then the pandemic hit. And then we were going to present the next year, and they called it off. And we already had our room booked, and I got no refund because we were going to go, and then they called it off. So we went, and there was still a couple thousand people in Point Pleasant. So that was our first year. Was it 21 that we went?
That would have been 21. Yes.
Yeah. And so then 22 we presented, 23 we presented, and then 24 we're going, and we want to be part of the festival instead of being in a tent selling books, doing a presentation.
right.
We want to be able to do like the hayride through the TNT area and talk to people and meet.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk to people anyway, but I mean, like literally be able to roam and,
Right.
see other people's presentations. And yeah.
Have you ran across Nick Redford?
We have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We met Nick, in fact, when we did our first presentation in 2022. He and Ken Gerhard and Lyle Blackburn were directly across from us. They had the 3 booths right across from us, and we were like in the upper right-hand corner is the way I'm going to describe it, but that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, we did meet Nick. Nick is a nice guy. I enjoyed talking to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was our first person we called to our first UFO conference, and he said yes. That was 2017 or 18.
Well, we call him the 17.
Yeah.
The event was 18. And it's funny because Nick also loves the Mothman Festival.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
the years that sometimes it falls on the same weekend. And if it falls on the same weekend, he tells us, "Sorry, I'm going there."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that we get it.
Yeah.
But yes, he's a great guy, and we love that. There's not that many of us, and I'm hoping that with what you guys are doing, what we're doing, there'll be more. But Nick is one of these people who sees the connection. It's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
You still have the old school who UFO people do not talk to cryptid people. They don't talk to ghost people. Right. So it's all, in my mind anyways, interconnected in our minds. So, bridging the tragedy, to me, covers all of that. And I think
Thank you for that. I've obviously we can't be with you guys this next weekend because we're going to be there. But I took a look at your speaker roster. It looks like Michael Carter is going to be there.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
What a gentleman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's fantastic.
I talked to him this morning, matter of fact, and he's quite the guy.
He's a great guy. He was our 3rd interview for the next book, the one we're working on right now. And what a great story. Very authentic, but just a very genuine person. And we had such a nice time visiting with him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are you working on? And tell us what's, because we're getting close. Tell us what you've got going on and what you're working on.
So what we're working on now is going to be a similar work to what we did with Bridging the Tragedy, but it's not going to be located to the Ohio River Valley. I mean, we might still have some participants who come from there.
Right.
We don't just yet, but the long and short of it is we're looking to be able to look at the experiences that people have had with trauma. And that doesn't necessarily mean paranormal trauma. It can be some other type of trauma like physical abuse or what have you.
Right.
But then it seems to me, and Jackie came up with this idea a while back, but there seems to be a relationship between trauma and people who have paranormal experiences. So we're going to investigate if there really is a relationship between those two things. We think that there is, but again, we're going to focus on the positive stuff. So we're going to look at what happened. You know, you saw a UFO, you have missing time, you maybe have implants. What good came from that? And then find out what the good stuff is, and then really focus on that and bring it out like we did in Bridging the Tragedy. And Michael is one individual we've interviewed. You guys are UFO guys, so I know you're familiar with the Rendlesham Forest incident.
Yeah.
So we flew to Texas a few weeks ago and interviewed a gentleman by the name of Monroe Nevels. Monroe was one of the guys who investigated the landing site of the craft that Jim Peniston saw.
Right.
And as I speak of that, Jim just messaged me on Facebook. I tried to get together with him today, but I was in his hometown, but he didn't get the message till too late. But Gary Osborne, his co-author, he's become a friend of ours too, and he and his wife are going to be in our next book as well. And you may well be aware of Melanie Kirchdorfer. Do you know who Melanie is?
Name is
Can't say
familiar.
I do.
So she experienced a UFO missing time event in Western Massachusetts in 1969.
Okay.
And there's recently been a documentary done on her experience along with some of the other folks. And we're hoping to get out to Massachusetts, possibly even later this year, to interview her as well too. So again, we're looking at people who have had extraordinary experiences, what we'd call paranormal experiences. They can be UFO, they can be poltergeist activity, they can be ghostly, whatever the case is, who have also experienced trauma, to focus on whether or not there's a relationship between the two, and then try to distill all the positive stuff that's happened in their lives by going through seemingly negative experiences.
Now, Jackie, before I leave, the 333, you guys were talking about the positive. That tells you to be positive, be creative, and keep on that path, that path of positivity. You know, use your creativity, use your imagination.
Good.
And we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, we're like out of time, and I really want to thank you both for joining us, giving this information. We're really looking forward to hearing more, to seeing what you're going to do, and having some conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having us
Thanks
on.
for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Blessed to you both. And to
Thank
all
you.
of you, thank you for being here. We'll see you. We won't see you next week
No, because we'll be at the
because we
UFO
have a conference. So in 2 weeks, we'll see you. Keep your eyes to the skies, and may all of your awakenings be mystical. Good night, everybody. We love you.
Bye-bye.